Hi there, this is Rene Bocava with AutoNet, and today I just want to quickly talk about using the Accessor in your ArcGIS API for apps. So the Accessor is pretty interesting. I kind of briefly touched on this before in a previous video on do-it-yourself Redux with version 4 of the ArcGIS JavaScript API. And you can see in this sample here, I've basically just got a 3D globe, and I've got a small React component up here that's got some information about my globe. So right now I'm not interacting with it, so the property here is false. But as soon as I start to pan around or interact with the view in any way, it's now true. And the scale and the zoom are also changing as well as I'm interacting with the map. And if I let go of the globe, interacting is now false, and everything else is changed as well. So that's kind of cool. And that's possible because I am actually using the Accessor as a base to be able to watch for these property changes. So if we look at the documentation for Accessor, you can see that it has a lot of subclasses. It's a pretty key component to a lot of what happens inside the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. And the documentation here has got a few things you can use. The main one to look for is watch, which is going to return a watch handle, which is something that also has a, which is key. If we look at what watch handle is, the watch handle is going to also have a remove method, which is nice because when you're watching for things with especially state management and you remove a component, you want to remove whatever handlers might have been on that component that were watching for property changes. So that's where this comes in handy. We can also look at the guide, for example. So we go to working with the API and we click on properties. We now have a small guide on how you can work with properties inside the API, which is basically what the Accessor lets you do. The Accessor lets you watch for property changes inside the API and be able to act on whatever those property changes are. So in this example, we're watching for the base map title to change, which means that map.basemap.title changes, and then we could do something whenever that change happens. So that's some information you can use there. Now in that previous sample, what I had shown is how you can use the Accessor to create a base store. Now the base store is pretty simple. I use accessor.create subclass, and I've got this property object in here. And with this property object, I'm just defining signals with that's going to be an array, and then state. And I can actually put array here, or I could put the brackets up here. It doesn't really matter. In my constructor, when I initialize it, I'm just going to say that to be sure that my signals is an empty array, and then my state is currently going to be undefined at that point. And then I've got a couple methods on here, and these are just used for the application itself. I won't go into detail here. I covered them in much more detail in the Redux video, and these are just kind of the underlying methods that you would normally get with a Redux application. You get a dispatch method to dispatch when something changes. You have a listen method to be able to watch for changes on the store, and an unlisten to be able to stop listening for those changes. And also a get state method, which probably isn't necessary. You can just grab the state property. What's kind of key here though is in terms of what the Accessor is doing is that on listen, and I'm going to get a callback in here. I'm going to create a signal, which is a watch handle that's going to watch for whenever the state property changes. And whenever that state property changes, I'm going to call the callback that was given. And then I just use the signals array to keep track of these different watch handles and callbacks and be able to remove them as needed throughout the application lifecycle. So I can use this base store to create a application store, or actually a more interesting one is going to be this info store. And this is going to be the store that's used for the React component that is displaying the properties on my page. This is my info component, and this is a store that powers that info component. So in this store, I have an initial state with properties for interacting, which is going to be false, scale, and zoom. That's the information that I'm displaying in my component. Now, when I create this component, I can go ahead and extend the base store, which again is my accessor, and this is ES6 class in here, and I'm going to initialize the state to be the initial state. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I'm just going to subscribe for whenever the map view is ready. I have an init method in here that's going to grab the data from the map view, and I have a reducer method, which is, again, this is a redux convention to update the state using the reducer and using the current state, and then the new data that's going to update my state here, and that will update the state here. Now remember, if I'm updating my state with the new state, then the base store that I have over here that has a listen method is going to go ahead and call whatever callback it was given in this callback method here when that state changes. And that's interesting because what that means, what I can do here is I can grab my store, use it in my React component, and React, again, if you're not familiar with it, has a method when it starts up called component did mount. That means that the component is on the page. I'm going to listen for the store, and that means I'm listening for state changes on the store. So whenever this state's updated, and I'm going to call this update method here, and I'm just binding it, do this update.bind this so that it's always bound to the component. And then on update, I'm just going to go ahead and use set state to update the state of my component with the state of the store. And if you're not familiar with React, again, set state is how you tell the React component to go ahead and update itself with its new state. And that's pretty simple. So that is how I'm able to get this component to go ahead and update itself whenever I am interacting with the map or updating the state of my interactions altogether. So one of the things I did, this is a sample from the an application that gets generated using the Yeoman generator for ArcGIS API 4 that I wrote a while ago. And what this sample does is very similar to what I was doing for the Redux application, except in this case I am just using it to set the actual properties for web map and view, and then inside my application I just set watchers on these for particular components to be able to watch for those change. So for example, if I look at the code here and I go to components here, and let's say that I have this data list in here, I'm grabbing a store here. So here we go. So I'm using watch utils for a one-time action to watch the store for when the view is updated. And when the view is updated, I grab the view and I go ahead and start up my component in here. I'm not concerned about watching for the whole state to update. I know that my store has a couple of components I'm interested in, and I can only watch for those particular properties. I'm sorry, the store has a couple of properties I'm interested in, and for every component I can watch a single store and just watch for when that property changes and do whatever it is that I want to be able to do. This isn't really a Redux style application that gets generated out of here, but I kind of like it for the simplicity of just be able to watch for whenever a property changes, like the web map or the view in my case, and I can have my application work around that however I want it to. So again, try it out, play with it, see what you can get out of it. The Accessor is pretty neat. Again, it's pretty core to the API, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more updates to this in the future. Thank you.